Quick one. Last video hit over 100 comments, which is absolutely mind-blowing for this channel. Let's try that again for this video. Comment down what you think about these stories, or just a hello, and the team will reply. We always reply to the comments. As always, please like and subscribe and help this channel grow. Thank you. I was looking forward to my first date with Mark. We had met online last month and chatted for a couple weeks. He seemed nice, nerdy, and shy like me. I was excited but pretty nervous too, since it was my first real date since ending a 2-year relationship about 6 months ago. I spent way too long getting ready, trying on outfit after outfit before finally choosing a flattering floral dress and brown boots. I blew out my long brown hair straight and carefully did my makeup, wanting to make a good first impression meeting someone new. We had planned to meet for dinner at a trendy new Italian restaurant downtown. I arrived right on time, and the hostess led me to a table where Mark was already waiting. He looked relieved when he saw me and awkwardly stood up to shake my hand. Up close, I noticed he was quite a bit shorter and stockier than he looked in his online photos. But his warm smile and pressed dress shirt quickly put me at ease. The conversation was a bit stiff and formal at first as we made small talk about our jobs, families, and backgrounds over the bread basket. But after we ordered pasta dishes and a carafe of red wine, the conversation began flowing better. Mark told me funny childhood stories, and we realized we actually had several niche interests in common, like obscure fantasy novels and competitive puzzle solving. I found myself enjoying his quirky sense of humor and easygoing vibe. After we finished dinner, Mark suggested going for a walk downtown before our movie to help digest all of the delicious pasta we devoured. We strolled slowly through the bustling pedestrian areas and city squares. He told me more lighthearted stories from his childhood, and I opened up about my rather sheltered upbringing, my large extended family, and the competitive gymnastics team I had been on in high school. Being there with him just felt comfortable and natural. As we walked past an empty playground, I impulsively took Mark's hand and led him over to the swings. I started pumping my legs enthusiastically, quickly soaring high into the air. I had always loved that swooping, stomach-dropping feeling when swinging. Mark swung tentatively at first until I teased him for being too chicken. He finally started pumping his short legs harder, trying to catch up to my height. We laughed together under the moonlight. After wearing ourselves out, we headed to the old theater downtown where an indie drama was showing. Mark insisted on paying for the tickets despite my protests. Inside the dim theater, I noticed Mark subtly rest his arm on the shared armrest between our seats. I found myself hoping he might try to hold my hand in the darkness. After so many months without dating, I was really craving some physical contact and affection. Throughout the artsy film, Mark leaned over periodically to whisper funny comments and reenact particularly dramatic scenes in an exaggerated fashion. His playful remarks made me have to stifle my laughter, and I was grateful it was a nearly empty showing. After the movie finished, Mark walked with me across the large parking garage to my far-flung parking spot. We laughed together as he continued reenacting parts of the film and debating possible endings. I was impressed with his witty humor and creative perspective on things. Suddenly, as we turned a corner, I stubbed my foot hard on something and pitched forward. My hands flailed wildly, but I still crashed down hard onto the rough concrete pavement. Sharp pain instantly shot up from my left ankle, which had hit directly onto a tiny plastic Stegosaurus toy. Mark quickly knelt down next to me, looking very concerned. I was badly scraped up along my knees and elbows, but my ankle was absolutely throbbing with pain. Mark gently felt along it and assessed it was likely badly sprained or possibly fractured, since I couldn't put any weight on it without yelping. Despite being quite a bit shorter than me, Mark carefully picked me up and carried me in his car. He then rushed back for mine. As Mark slowly and carefully drove towards the nearest urgent care clinic, he kept glancing over periodically to check on me. My ankle was extremely swollen, and I was trying not to cry from the intense pain. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, Mark confessed that he wasn't completely over his ex-girlfriend, who he had dated for 4 years until recently. He said going out with me tonight made him realize he just wasn't ready to date again yet. I stared at him in disbelief. What timing to admit this revelation? Mark dropped me at the clinic entrance before parking to come inside. My roommate who lived nearby arrived shortly after to meet me. X-rays showed I had badly sprained my ankle, but luckily not fully fractured any bones. Mark had already left after giving my roommate money for the copay and leaving a short note hoping I felt better soon. Over the next month, my sprained ankle steadily healed, though it still pains me sometimes even now. I decided I probably wasn't ready to try dating again soon after that crazy experience. My friends still tease me about my plastic dinosaur downfall every time we go out for drinks together. I just have to shake my head and laugh. Definitely the most bizarre and embarrassing first date I've ever had, but at least it makes for a funny story. I had been harboring a crush on my childhood friend Clark for what felt like forever. We grew up together on the same suburban block, riding bikes and exploring the woods behind our houses. Through elementary and middle school, we were constant companions, getting into mischief at the bus stop, copying each other's homework, passing notes in the back of class. My little girl heart fluttered whenever we played pretend games, imagining we were explorers or superheroes. I'd stare longingly at Clark across the cafeteria, admiring his shy smile. At sleepovers, I'd secretly sketch our initials surrounded by hearts in my notebook as I daydreamed of us growing up and falling in love. By high school, my devotion to Clark was cemented. I doodled Mrs. Alexandra all over my binders. My friends teased me relentlessly about my crush, but I didn't care. In my mind, it was destiny for us to end up together. Sure, Clark only saw me as a buddy those days, ruffling my hair or playfully nudging me in the hall. But I just knew one day he'd realize we were meant to be. After graduation, we both stayed local for college. I'd often spot Clark around campus, my breath catching when our eyes met. He was more handsome than ever, broad shoulders in his baseball tee, warm brown eyes that sparkled when he laughed. I'd linger outside his classes, praying he'd notice me as more than just his childhood pal. When he finally asked me to hang out, just the two of us, I was over the moon. Skiing sounded like the perfect romantic date where we could talk and really connect. I imagined us holding hands on the ski lift, stealing kisses in the lodge. This was my chance after all those years. I was determined to show Clark how perfect we were together. The morning of the date, I agonized over what to wear, changing outfits a dozen times. I wanted to look cute but not overdressed. I settled on my coziest sweater, hoping Clark would lend me his jacket if I got cold. A single braid added a flirty touch. Perfume dabbed, lip gloss swiped. I was ready. When Clark picked me up, the butterflies in my stomach went wild. We chatted happily during the drive about classes, friends, plans for winter break. I felt giddy being the center of his attention, hoping he'd notice how the ski pants flattered my figure. This was really happening. A real date with my dream guy. At the rental shop, Clark patiently guided me through getting all geared up. Boots, skis, poles. His hands brushed mine as he adjusted my helmet, sending tingles up my spine. On the bunny slope, he sweetly coached me through the basics. Bend your knees. Keep your tips up. I wobbled along, thrilled every time he steadied me with a hand on my back. But soon Clark was eager to hit bigger slopes, effortlessly carving wide arcs as he sped downhill. I wavered behind, squinting against the bright glare. The mountain loomed ahead, so much steeper and icier than the baby bunny hill. Apprehension choked my excitement as I realized how in over my head I was. Riding up the ski lift, my stomach dropped as the ground spun dizzyingly far below. I white-knuckled the safety bar, too terrified to appreciate the picturesque snow-dusted pines. At the top, Clark shot me a smile and a thumbs up before disappearing over the crest. I hesitated, knees quaking as I inched toward the slope's edge. One tentative turn was all it took for gravity to seize control. My skis picked up momentum, the wind screaming in my ears. All I could do was cling on in frozen panic as the slope blurred past in a blur. When I finally spilled onto the flat base, tangled in my skis, the impact knocked the wind out of me. I lay gasping out of the overcast sky, head throbbing. It was humiliating, the beginner wiping out her very first run down. Where was Clark? Why hadn't he waited to guide me down? The kindness of the couple who stopped to help patched my bruised ego. But now worry set in. Had something happened to Clark out there? It wasn't like him to just abandon me without a word. I waited and waited, expecting him to come rushing into the lodge any minute, apologizing for getting waylaid. But as time passed with no sign of Clark, irritation replaced my concern. How could he just leave me alone and stranded after I had embarrassingly face-planted on the slopes? What about our perfect date, cuddling by the fire, sipping hot chocolate? The truth sank like a stone in my gut. Clark wasn't into me like that. I was just a childhood buddy tagging along, not someone he wanted to impress or romance. All these years, he'd seen me only as a friend, oblivious to my pining heart. I rode home stewing, feeling like an utter fool. At home, I swapped my ski clothes for pajamas and wiped off the frivolous date makeup. Curled under a blanket, I slowly let go of the fantasy I clung to so desperately through my youth. Clark wasn't my prince. This date made that crushingly clear. Still, a small stubborn part of me whispered that maybe it could work out someday. We had so much history, so many shared memories. I just needed to make Clark see how we belonged together. This was just one bad date, not the end. But the truth stared back from the mirror of my vanity, reflected in the stack of old yearbooks open to photos of a beaming young Clark. He was never mine to begin with. I'd only imagined it to be so. With time, the sting would fade. For now, I just needed to pull on my big girl boots and step into reality. My first love was not destined to be my only. The world was filled with possibilities beyond a childhood dream that would never come true. I have been looking forward to my first date with Steve for weeks. We had matched on a popular dating app and hit it off right away over messages. He was always thoughtful in his replies, asking how my day was, remembering little details about my job and hobbies that I had mentioned. I got butterflies in my stomach every time my phone dinged with a new note from him. Steve seemed so friendly, easygoing, and interested in getting to know the real me. When he finally asked me out to dinner, I was thrilled and started planning my outfit immediately. I took extra care getting ready, booking a blowout at my favorite salon to look polished. I wanted to feel confident and beautiful for our special night. After trying on multiple dresses, I settled on a flattering wrap-style midi dress in a rich emerald tone. I paired it with strappy heels and delicate gold jewelry. As I did my makeup, I felt giddy with excitement for the night ahead. This was the best I had felt about a first date in years. Steve suggested we meet at a trendy new farm-to-table restaurant downtown that I had been wanting to check out. I arrived first and gave my name to the hostess for our reservation. I was shown to a quiet table near the back of the bustling dining room. Sipping ice water, admiring the charming rustic decor, I watched the entrance anxiously for Steve's arrival. Right on time, I saw him walk in, tall and handsome just like his photos, with warm brown eyes and a bright smile. We exchanged a slightly awkward hug, and he led me to our table, lightly resting his hand on the small of my back. I noticed how nice he smelled, clean and masculine. Over the candlelit table, the conversation flowed easily once we settled in with a bottle of Malbec to share. I was relieved that it didn't feel forced or stilted like some first dates I'd been on. Steve told me all about his recent promotion at the tech company he worked for and some funny stories from his college lacrosse days. I found myself laughing loudly at his witty jokes and comments. He was so easy to talk to and seemed genuinely interested as I caught him up on my latest graphic design projects. I also shared how I was training for my first half marathon. Steve asked thoughtful questions and told me how impressed he was by my commitment to fitness. After we ordered our entrees, a juicy steak for him and seared scallops for me, Steve politely excused himself to use the restroom. I took the opportunity to check my lipstick and my compact and sent a quick text to my roommate about how well everything was going so far. I really felt optimistic about the great connection Steve and I seemed to have established. This was one of the best first dates I had been on. When Steve returned from the bathroom, however, I'd noticed something seemed a little off. He was fidgety and avoided making eye contact with me. When I asked how he was liking the new promotion so far, his answer trailed off mid-sentence as he shifted in his seat. His face looked flushed, and I wasn't sure if it was just the wine or if he was coming down with something. An awkward silence fell over the table. I sipped my Malbec nervously and racked my brain trying to figure out if I had said something wrong. Steve just didn't seem fully present anymore. Our food arrived, and I slowly picked up my perfectly cooked scallops, waiting for Steve to initiate conversation again. He hardly touched the steak he had been so excited to order earlier. I asked if the food was okay, and he mumbled that he just didn't have much of an appetite anymore. He seemed so uncomfortable, constantly readjusting himself in his chair. I'd noticed a thin sheen of sweat had formed along his hairline. My mind raced. Was this about to shape up to be the world's most awkward first date story? Maybe he had gotten bad news on his phone, or the promotion at work was stressing him out more than he let on. I wished I could read his mind. Just as I was about to ask Steve if everything was all right, he quickly excused himself again, saying he needed to use the restroom once more. I watched him hurry away with his head down, weaving between crowded tables. Now I was really perplexed. Steve had been in the bathroom less than 15 minutes ago. Was he sick? I awkwardly poked at the remainder of my food, completely confused by his bizarre behavior. Nearly 20 minutes passed without any sign of Steve. I flagged down our server and asked if he could please check on him because he had been gone so long. The server gave me a knowing look and headed towards the men's room. I waited nervously, convincing myself that Steve must have gotten an urgent phone call or maybe food poisoning was coming on fast. Please don't let this be as awkward as I think, I pleaded to myself. Finally, I saw Steve reemerge from the back hall where the restrooms were located. He had a strange grimace on his reddened face and seemed to be walking with discomfort. I noticed his shirt was heavily wrinkled in the back. As he plopped back down in the booth, a sour, unpleasant smell surrounded him. I heard squelching noises whenever he moved. My eyes widened in disbelief as I realized this grown man must have actually soiled himself uncontrollably. Steve kept his eyes glued to the tablecloth, refusing to make eye contact. He mumbled, "I am so sorry, but I really need to leave immediately. I have a little accident in the bathroom." I sat there in stunned silence, unable to formulate a response. Steve quickly threw some cash on the table and hurried towards the exit without looking back or even saying goodbye. I gathered my things feeling completely mortified. The nearby tables had likely noticed Steve's bizarre exit and probably assumed what had happened. I rushed out hoping I could leave before someone questioned me. My heart was pounding with embarrassment and confusion about how our date could have gone so wrong. Later that night, I got a long apologetic text from Steve explaining he must have gotten hit with sudden food poisoning that caused him to have violent diarrhea in the bathroom. He said he soiled himself completely by accident and was so sorry for the traumatic experience. Steve asked if we could possibly start over and have a do-over first date soon. I appreciated him taking responsibility for the humiliating incident, but I just could not bring myself to see Steve again after that. Every time I thought of him, I pictured that awful smell and imagined the embarrassing mess he must have made. I politely declined a second first date and wished him well, deciding it was better not to drag things out. In retrospect, that awful first date taught me an important lesson. For early dates, casual meetups like grabbing coffee or a drink are much safer bets than committing to a long dinner. That way, if things go poorly or an emergency comes up, either person can make a quick, polite exit without too much embarrassment on either side. I'm willing to laugh about Steve's mortifying bathroom accident now, but I will certainly never forget that traumatizing experience. Next time, I will keep first dates simple to hopefully avoid another poop debacle. I was living in a small town and feeling quite lonely when I met Jim through a mutual friend. He seemed nice enough, if a little quiet. So when he asked me out, I agreed even though I didn't feel much of a spark. Our first date was painfully awkward. Conversation was like pulling teeth with him only giving one-word answers or short sentences. I kept trying to engage him in topics I thought he'd be interested in like movies, sports, and local happenings, but he just wasn't forthcoming at all. I attempted to get him to open up about his job, family, and hobbies, but his responses were always curt and provided little opportunity for me to ask follow-up questions. Still, I chalked it up to first date nerves. I figured maybe he was just shy and anxious and would relax and open up on the next date once the initial awkwardness wore off. Plus, he was cute enough and seemed nice, even if he was quiet. So when he asked me out again the following weekend, I said yes. This time he offered to drive so we could go to a pub in the next town over. I thought getting out of our small town might get him to relax a bit in a more lively environment. Boy, was I wrong. The date started pleasantly enough with him making an effort at small talk during the drive over. He asked how my week had been and made a few comments about the weather. But as soon as we got to the pub, he started pounding beers back one after another. I nursed one gin and tonic the whole night, growing increasingly uncomfortable as he got progressively more drunk. With each beer, his words started slurring together and he got louder and more animated. He wasn't exactly being obnoxious, but I could tell the alcohol was hitting him hard and fast. At one point, I gently asked him if he was okay to drive back. He insisted he was totally fine, even though he was clearly on the verge of being plastered. I debated just calling a cab for myself right then, but I didn't want to leave him there alone in that state. When it was finally time to leave, he stumbled badly on the way to the car and dropped his keys. As he struggled awkwardly to pick them up, he mumbled that maybe he had overdone it a bit and couldn't drive after all. Then he asked me to share a cab with him back to my place because he didn't want to go home drunk. Reluctantly, I agreed since the alternative was leaving him passed out alone in his car in an unfamiliar town. The cab ride was painfully awkward with him rambling drunkenly about how much he liked me and how he hoped I wouldn't leave him. He kept slurring things like, "You're so amazing," and "I need you in my life," and "Please give me a chance." I awkwardly patted his shoulder and assured him I just wanted to get him home safe, all while knowing there was no way I'd be going on another date with him. His behavior was raising all kinds of red flags, and I just wanted the night to be over. When we got to my place, he begged to be allowed inside to lie down and sober up. Against my better judgment, I let him in, thinking he could at least crash on the couch versus passing out in the cab. But as soon as we got inside, he lunged forward and pulled me into my bedroom, hugging me tight against his body. I struggled to disentangle myself as he started crying heavily about how lonely and depressed he was and how desperately he needed me in his life. He wouldn't let go, so I really had to pry myself out of his grip. Eventually, I managed to get him onto the bed fully clothed while he continued mumbling and crying incoherently about how scared he was that I would abandon him. Once he seemed to pass out, I locked my bedroom door from the outside and spent the night wide awake on the couch. I barely slept a wink, deeply disturbed by the entire experience. All I could think was that I never should have gone out with him again after the first terrible date. I should have trusted my gut then and shut things down immediately. In the morning, I told him very clearly that I did not want to continue seeing him under any circumstances. He was very apologetic for his behavior and swore he would never drink like that again. But I held firm that we were simply not a match and that I was not interested in giving it a third try. After a painfully awkward breakfast, I eventually convinced him it was time to leave. He asked if he could call me again sometime, and I unambiguously told him no, that would not be happening. He finally left without further incident. I thought that was the end of my brief and ill-advised entanglement with Jim, but a few months later I was performing in a play at my university. After the show, I was greeting audience members who had come backstage to congratulate the cast. To my shock, I looked up and saw Jim standing there looking upset and agitated. Before I could even process that he was there, he burst out angrily, "So this is what you've been so busy with." Then he turned abruptly on his heel and stormed out without another word. I stood there stunned, my heart pounding. He had driven over 30 minutes to my campus, sat through the 90-minute performance just to make that bizarre, angry statement. I realized then that his behavior went far beyond mere social awkwardness or drunken antics. This guy clearly had some deeper emotional issues at play. After that disturbing incident, I asked my friend who had first introduced us what she really knew about Jim and his background. Turns out he'd been obsessively fixated on her for years until she finally had to threaten legal action to make him cut contact completely. She apologized profusely for putting me in that position. I told her not to feel guilty since there was no way she could have known he would act so inappropriately with me. But I did feel shaken and unsettled when I realized I had likely been interacting with a truly unstable person. I felt lucky I had trusted my instincts after those first 2 uncomfortable dates and avoided seeing him again. Things could have ended up much worse. Going forward, I vowed to be far more selective and cautious about who I agreed to date, even if it meant more lonely nights in that small town. As a young woman living alone, I realized I needed to listen to my intuition and prioritize safety over companionship or politeness. I had been fortunate that Jim's issues had only led to emotional discomfort and awkwardness. It could have gone in a much more dangerous direction. Moving forward, I'll be trusting my gut and keeping myself out of uncomfortable situations in the first place. I was pretty excited when Jess agreed to go on a date with me. We'd met a couple of weeks earlier at a friend's party and really hit it off. She was cute, funny, and seemed really sweet. We exchanged numbers that night and started texting regularly after that. When I finally got the courage to ask her out, I was thrilled that she said yes. We made plans to meet up for drinks at a bar in our neighborhood. I got there a little early and grabbed us a table while I waited for her to show up. When Jess walked in, she gave me a big smile and waved before coming over. She looked just as cute as I remembered and gave me a hug before sitting down. We started off with some small talk about how our weeks had been going while we looked over the drink menu. I was feeling really good about the date so far. The conversation was flowing smoothly and Jess seemed comfortable and engaged. After we ordered drinks, we fell into an easy back and forth about our interests, friends, and family. Throughout the date, I kept noticing little things that made me like Jess more and more. She had a great laugh and seemed genuinely interested in learning about me. At one point, we moved to sit side by side on the same side of the table and I put my arm around her. She smiled, leaned into me a bit, and didn't pull away, a good sign. After a couple hours of talking, laughing, and even some kissing, we decided to call it a night. I offered to walk Jess home since she only lived a few blocks away. On the walk to her place, we held hands and talked about getting together again soon. When we got to her building, things got a little heated with more kissing up against the door. Nothing more happened, though, since we both wanted to take things slow. I headed home full of excitement about Jess and feeling sure that we had really hit it off. Over the next couple days, we texted frequently, continuing the flirty banter from our date. It seemed clear we were both looking forward to date number 2. About 2 days after our date, Jess mentioned in a text that she was feeling really run down and might be coming down with something. Later that day, when I asked how she was feeling, she said she had gotten worse with body aches, a fever and fatigue hitting her hard. I told her I hoped she felt better soon and to let me know if she needed anything. The next day, I woke up feeling off. As the day went on, I developed a bad cough and breathing became difficult. I had a feeling it could be COVID, but was hoping it was just a cold or something else minor. When I texted Jess to see how she was doing, she said her symptoms had gotten even worse overnight. She planned to go get tested the next day. Sure enough, a couple days later, we both found out we had tested positive for COVID. I was definitely shocked since I didn't expect Jess and I to have transmitted it on our one date. We had tried to be careful about contact. But with bars being high risk, I guess we must have slipped up at some point. I reached out to let Jess know about my positive test and see how she was holding up. But I never heard back from her after that. As my own symptoms got increasingly bad over the next week, I was too sick and exhausted to think much about her lack of response. I assumed she was also knocked down by the virus and didn't have the energy to be on her phone. After about 2 weeks, I was finally starting to recover and feel more like myself. I tried messaging Jess again to check in and see if she was doing any better. Still no response, which seemed odd. Once I was back to work and life was getting back to normal, I sent one more text saying I hoped she was okay since I hadn't heard from her in a while. Nothing. At that point, I realized I must have been ghosted. I was pretty surprised and confused. The date had gone so well it seemed, and our texts after were just as positive. I had no idea what had changed or why Jess wanted nothing to do with me all of a sudden. A week later, I happened to open WhatsApp and saw I had been blocked by Jess. I checked Instagram too, had been blocked there as well. That stung quite a bit and was really confusing. I thought back over our interactions and couldn't think of anything I had said or done wrong to make Jess want to cut contact so abruptly. My best guess was that she felt embarrassed about us transmitting COVID to each other, or maybe even blamed me in some way. Or she could have met someone else right before or after our date. I really had no way to know for sure why she ghosted and blocked me. For a little bit, it hurt my feelings and made me feel insecure about what I must have done wrong. But eventually I realized there was no point in dwelling on someone who clearly didn't want me in their life for unknown reasons. I had to accept that things fizzled out through no direct fault of my own. It wasn't the ending I expected, but I knew I had to pick myself up and get back out there. After some reflection, I took the mature route and decided not to take the ghosting personally. On to the next potential date. I had been chatting with this girl, D, online for about a week. The conversations were fun and she seemed normal enough. So when she suggested meeting up in person, I agreed. We made plans to get dinner at a restaurant downtown that Friday night. I arrived a few minutes early and waited nervously by the host's stand. A few minutes later, I saw a girl walk in who matched Dee's description. She spotted me and came over, confirming she was my date. We said hi and I suggested we head to our table. As we started following the host, I noticed her t-shirt and did a double take. It was a picture of my face on it. I laughed awkwardly, thinking she must be playing some kind of practical joke. But as we sat down and started looking at the menus, she didn't say anything about the shirt or act like it was a joke at all. I tried to ignore the weird shirt and just have a normal conversation. She seemed nice enough at first, but over the course of dinner, she started saying and doing some odd things that made me uncomfortable. For example, she knew obscure details about my life that I definitely hadn't told her about online. She also kept steering the conversation back to how much she admired me and wanted to get to know the real me. At one point, she took out her phone to show me a picture. When she unlocked it, I was horrified to see her home screen was also a picture of me. This girl was seriously obsessed with me already after a week of chatting. I started racking my brain for an excuse to politely end this date early. After we finished eating, she suggested we go back to my place and get to know each other better. She told me she had actually packed an overnight bag just in case, seeming sure I would invite her over. I awkwardly dodged the suggestion, saying I had an early morning the next day. She seemed disappointed but perked up immediately when I said we could get dessert somewhere else. The more time I spent with her, the more uncomfortable I felt about her over-the-top obsession with me. I knew I needed to get out of there. I made the excuse that I had to use the restroom before we left for dessert. I headed towards the back where I saw the signs pointing to the restrooms, but instead of going into either one, I bolted out the back door of the restaurant. My car was parked just around the corner. I jumped in, locked the doors immediately, and drove straight home without looking back. My heart was racing and I felt shaky after that bizarre experience. Once I got home, I poured myself a stiff drink to calm my nerves. I kept debating whether or not I should text her, let her know I left, make up an excuse, or just block her number. But before I could decide, my phone started ringing. It was her. I declined the call and turned my phone off. Looking back now, I still cringe at how weird and creepy that date was. I don't know what Dee's deal was or why she became so obsessed with me so fast. I'm just glad I trusted my instincts and got out of there before things got any stranger. Now I'm a lot more cautious when online dating. I make sure to really get to know someone first before agreeing to meet in person. And I always drive myself on the first date so I can leave whenever I need to. Live and learn, I guess. A few days later, I finally decided to block Dee's number. I didn't want to risk her continuing to harass me. I also deleted my dating profile and took a break from online dating for a while. The whole experience had really shaken me up. About a week after the disastrous date, I was running some errands around town. As I pulled into a parking spot at the grocery store, I happened to glance in my rearview mirror and saw a familiar face. It was Dee. My heart started racing again as I watched her get out of her car and walk towards the store. I ducked down in my seat, praying she wouldn't see me. Once she was inside, I contemplated just driving away, but I needed to pick up a few things, so I forced myself to go in. I kept my head down and tried to quickly grab what I needed and get out. As I was standing in the checkout line, I glanced around nervously, worried she might reappear. Luckily, I made it out of the store without incident, but the encounter had put me on high alert. For the next few weeks, I swear I kept seeing Dee everywhere I went around town. I started to worry that she was actually stalking me. I considered reporting her to the police, but I didn't have any concrete evidence of her actually harassing me, other than a few chance run-ins. I didn't want to cause a big scene unless I absolutely had to. So instead, I tried to just be extra vigilant and avoid going out as much as possible. Thankfully, the sightings eventually tapered off, and I stopped seeing her around. I'm not sure if she moved away, got bored, or just realized I wasn't going to engage with her anymore. Either way, I was relieved when the coast seemed to be clear. These days, I'm a lot more cautious when it comes to online dating. I make sure to really vet someone before agreeing to meet up. And I always had an easy exit strategy planned, just in case. That whole experience with Dee really shook my confidence, but I'm slowly getting back out there. I figure as long as I'm smart about it, I can still find a real connection. I just have to be a lot more wary of any potential red flags moving forward. Luckily, most people I've met since then have been completely normal. Looking back, the whole thing with Dee feels like a crazy nightmare. I'm just glad I trusted my gut and got out of there when I did. Who knows how much worse it could have gotten if I hadn't. Now I have a crazy first date story to tell, I guess, one that serves as a good cautionary tale for anyone else dipping their toes into the online dating pool. Live and learn, right? It was supposed to be a simple first date, a chance to get to know someone new and see if there could be a connection. I had been looking forward to it all week, hoping this could be the start of something special. But what unfolded that evening quickly turned into a nightmare that I'll never forget. I met him at a cozy little restaurant downtown, one with an impressive menu that caught my eye. As we were being seated, I made sure to inform the host about my severe peanut allergy, just to be on the safe side. The host assured me they would make a note of it and that the kitchen would be careful. Satisfied, I turned my attention to my date. He seemed nice enough, a bit nervous but pleasant to talk to. We made small talk as we perused the menu, and when the server came to take our order, he enthusiastically recommended a dish that sounded delicious. I hesitated, not wanting to order something that might trigger my allergy, but he insisted it was nut-free. Trusting his judgment, I agreed and placed my order. The meal arrived, and it looked incredible. I eagerly took a bite, savoring the flavors. But almost immediately, a familiar tightness began to build in my throat. My heart started racing as I realized something was horribly wrong. I frantically scanned the dish, and to my horror, I spotted tiny pieces of what looked like peanuts. Panic set in as the symptoms of my allergy rapidly escalated. My breathing became labored, and my face started to swell. I desperately tried to signal the server, but I could barely speak. My date, finally realizing the gravity of the situation, sprung into action calling for help. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and started administering emergency treatment. They quickly determined the severity of my reaction and rushed me to the hospital, my date trailing closely behind. The next few hours were a blur of needles, IV fluids, and anxious waiting as the medical team worked to stabilize my condition. As I slowly regained my faculties, the gravity of what had happened began to sink in. This was supposed to be a simple first date, a chance to get to know someone new and potentially build a connection. Instead, I found myself in a hospital bed, my body still reeling from the traumatic allergic reaction. What made it even more infuriating was the fact that I had explicitly informed the host about my allergy, yet the dish I had been served contained the very thing that could have killed me. And my date, the person I had trusted to make a responsible recommendation, had been completely careless, putting my life at risk. As I lay there, hooked up to various machines, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger, fear, and disappointment. This was supposed to be a fun, light-hearted evening, but it had turned into a nightmare that I wouldn't soon forget. The doctors assured me that I was stable and would make a full recovery, but the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. I couldn't help but wonder how I would ever be able to trust someone enough to go on a date again, knowing that a simple mistake could have such catastrophic consequences. In the days that followed, I replayed the events of that evening over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. How could someone be so careless, knowing the severity of my allergy? Was it simply a case of negligence, or was there something more sinister at play? As I grappled with these questions, I found myself becoming increasingly wary of the world around me. I couldn't help but feel that my safety was always at risk, and that I had to be constantly on guard, even in the most mundane of situations. It was a heavy burden to bear, one that I knew I would have to learn to navigate if I wanted to have any semblance of a normal life. But in that moment, as I lay in the hospital bed, all I could think about was the sheer terror of that evening, and the realization that my life had been put in the hands of someone who clearly didn't take my condition seriously. As I was discharged and made my way home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that I had survived the ordeal. But the emotional toll was undeniable, and I knew that it would take time and a lot of self-care to work through the trauma. In the end, that first date turned out to be a harsh reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of taking care of one another. It was a lesson that I never wanted to learn the hard way, but one that I knew would stay with me for the rest of my life. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself grappling with a range of emotions. The anger and disappointment I felt towards my date and the restaurant staff never fully subsided, and I couldn't help but question whether I would ever be able to trust someone enough to put my life in their hands again. The fear-anxiety that had gripped me in the aftermath of the incident also lingered, making it difficult for me to even think about going on another date. I found myself constantly second-guessing every situation, always on the lookout for potential threats to my safety. It was an exhausting way to live, and I knew that I needed to find a way to move forward. With the support of friends and family, I slowly began to work through the trauma, seeking out counseling and support groups to help me process the experience. Over time, I started to regain a sense of control over my life. I learned to be more proactive about my allergy, taking steps to ensure that I was always prepared for potential emergencies. I also began to open up to the idea of dating again, but this time with a newfound caution and a determination to never let my guard down. As I reflect on that fateful evening, I can't help but feel a sense of sadness and frustration. What should have been a simple, enjoyable first date turned into a life-threatening ordeal, all because of someone else's carelessness. But I also know that I have the strength and resilience to overcome this challenge, and that I'll never let an experience like this define me. In the end, that first date may have been a nightmare, but it has also taught me valuable lessons about the importance of being vigilant, the fragility of life, and the power of self-care and support. And while the scars may never fully heal, I am determined to move forward, one day at a time, and to never take my safety or the trust of others for granted. It was supposed to be a romantic dinner date. I met her at a fancy restaurant downtown, all dressed up and ready to impress. We'd connected on a dating app a few weeks ago, and the conversation had been going well, so I was excited to finally meet her in person. Dinner started off great. She was even more beautiful in person than her photos, and we seemed to click right away. We ordered a nice bottle of wine and enjoyed a lovely meal, laughing and sharing stories about our lives. I was really starting to think this could be the start of something special. About halfway through the meal, she excused herself to use the restroom. "I'll be right back," she said with a smile. I smiled back and watched as she made her way across the dining room. Several minutes passed, but she didn't return. I sipped my wine and glanced around, wondering what could be taking her so long. Maybe she got caught up talking to someone she knew, or maybe she was freshening up a bit. I tried not to overthink it. After 15 minutes had gone by, I started to get a bit concerned. I debated whether I should go check on her, but I didn't want to seem overbearing. She was a grown woman after all. I'm sure she was fine. But as the minutes ticked by, my concern only grew. What if something had happened to her? What if she had gotten sick or hurt or... No, I couldn't think like that. I decided to give it a few more minutes before I did anything. 20 minutes in and still no sign of her. I couldn't sit here any longer. I excused myself from the table and made my way to the restrooms. I knocked on the ladies' room door, but there was no answer. I peeked inside, but it was empty. I returned to our table, my heart racing. Her purse and coat were still there, so she couldn't have just left. I flagged down our server. "Excuse me? Have you seen the woman I was dining with? She went to the restroom a while ago and hasn't come back." The server's face fell. "I'm so sorry, sir. This has happened before. Some of our guests have a habit of skipping out on the bill after using the restroom." My stomach dropped. "What? Are you saying she..." The server nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so. It's a real problem we've been dealing with. Some people just don't want to pay for their meal." I was in shock. How could this be happening? Everything had seemed to be going so well. I couldn't believe I'd been duped like this. The server offered to call the police, but I declined. I didn't want to make a big scene. Instead, I reluctantly picked up the hefty bill and paid it in full, my face burning with embarrassment. As I left the restaurant, I felt like a complete fool. I should have known something was off. The warning signs were all there: the overly charming personality, the constant need to impress. I'd let my guard down, and now I was paying the price. I trudged back to my car, my mind racing. How could I have been so stupid? This wasn't the first time this had happened to me, and I couldn't believe I'd fallen for it again. I thought I was smarter than that. As I drove home, I couldn't stop replaying the evening in my head. The way she had smiled at me, the way she had listened so intently to my stories. Had it all been an act? Had she been planning this all along? I felt sick to my stomach. Not only had I been scammed out of a hefty dinner bill, but I had also been completely duped. This woman had wormed her way into my life, only to disappear without a trace. I felt violated, betrayed. When I got home, I immediately deleted her number and any trace of our interaction from my phone. I didn't want to be reminded of this humiliating experience. I poured myself a stiff drink and tried to push it all out of my mind, but the memories kept creeping back. I couldn't stop wondering what had become of her. Had she done this before? How many other unsuspecting victims had she scammed? The thought made me sick. In the days that followed, I couldn't bring myself to go on another date. The idea of putting myself out there again, of risking being taken advantage of, was just too much. I retreated into my own little bubble, content to remain single and safe. It's been months now, and I still can't shake the feeling of being so utterly fooled. I'm more cautious than ever when it comes to dating, always on the lookout for any red flags. I've become distrustful of everyone, afraid of being hurt again. Sometimes I wonder if she's out there doing the same thing to someone else. The thought makes my blood boil. I wish I could find her and confront her, make her understand the pain and humiliation she's caused me. But I know that's just a fantasy. She's long gone, and left to pick up the pieces of my shattered trust. I've learned a hard lesson from this experience. I know now that you can never truly let your guard down, not even on a first date. The world is a dangerous place, and there are people out there who will stop at nothing to take advantage of you. I'll never make that mistake again. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.